We're doing biblical eschatology again. Biblical eschatology, going to let the Bible speak for itself. All right, today is lesson 17. We're going to be talking about the number of the beast. I've been wanting to do this message, this teaching for a long time because it's a lot of fun, quite honestly. So, all right. We want to talk about, what is the number of the beast? There's this mystical number in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. And are people going to have this number written on their forehead? If you watch the movies and TV and see a lot of there's a lot of fear and speculation associated with this number, as if it has some mystical power. But, there's confusion about who is the beast. Is it this guy? Is it that guy? There's all people in history and modern world leaders are accused of being that one might be the beast, or that one might be the beast. And the Pope, for the longest time, people have said this Pope is the beast. And then, unfortunately, all these people stubbornly refuse to bring in the end times and destroy bring about the end of history. And they just demonstrate, of course, that they are not the beast. They also demonstrate that all this speculation and fear is just inappropriate. It's not what God calls us to. God calls us to be wise, to be sober-minded, and not to be fearful. So we're going to examine this number of the beast in a sober-minded way from the biblical text and be rational about it and use our wisdom. That's the plan. All right. Now, as I was saying, everyone says there's all these people. Maybe this one's the beast. Maybe that one's the beast. It would make some people just throw up their hands and go, well, maybe we can never know. But we can know because God has given us a revelation in the Bible. It is a revelation, not a concealation. He is not concealing things. He's revealing. As Daniel said, he is a God who reveals mysteries. He's not a secret-keeping God. And the book of Revelation is not a code book. A lot of people seem to think that it's a cryptogram that has to be solved, but it's not. Now, there are riddles, and this 600, this number of the beast is a riddle, but we can solve the riddle because we have information, a revelation from God. And every passage has an objective meaning. We know the rules of hermeneutics fix the meaning of every Bible passage. So it's important as we look at this to remember the rule, everything in the Bible is to be understood as it was meant by its original author to be understood by its original audience. When we do that, we can know the answer. All right, so we're going to ask the following questions. What does the number of the beast mean? What is the number of the beast? Who is the beast that has a number? And what is a beast in the book of Revelation? We're going to ask them in reverse order because that's the best way, or that's the way I've decided. Yeah, well, it's not like you have a choice. All right, so a quick review. Remember the context of the book of Revelation. It's an apocalyptic. It's full of symbolism. All the symbols are taken from the Old Testament motifs. Everything he sees is a symbol. Symbols are not real, but what they represent, their reference, are real. And we went over the themes of Revelation. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ. It's written to the church about how the world has changed in the light of the cross. What is our status in light of the cross? And how are we to behave in light of the cross? So it reveals Christ, cross, and church. 3 C's, if you like that kind of thing. What was our status and how we should behave, ethics. And it's not a revelation of the future, but as I showed before, but it was relevant to them in their time period, and the meaning that it had is still relevant to us. All right, so that's our background. That's the context. Now, in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation, John sees 2 beasts. I often hear people say, who is the beast of Revelation? Well, there are 2. You should be more specific. But since, as I pointed out, everything he sees is a symbol. If he sees a beast or 2 beasts, then that's a symbol for something. So we want to know, what does the beast symbolize? Well, we don't have to guess because the answer is right there in the Bible. Daniel has talked about beasts, and John in Revelation takes a lot of his Old Testament motifs from the book of Daniel. And so we have, many callbacks from Daniel. So, and when John in Revelation uses an Old Testament motif, he doesn't change the meaning of it. So if we know what a beast is in Daniel, we'll know what it is in Revelation. And it's very clear from Daniel, as I'll show you in just a second, that a beast represents either an empire or an emperor, a kingdom or the king. And in fact, Daniel talks about these things, the king and the kingdom, as if they're the same. They're conflated, right? That's the word we use. To conflate is to treat two different things as if they're the same. So let me show you what that looks like in Daniel. He writes in chapter 7. Okay, so now the angel is explaining to Daniel. Daniel had this vision of the beast, and he says, what's this all about? And the angel comes to him and is explaining. The angel says, these four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. Now later in the same chapter, the same angel says this. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. So now it started out, beast is a king. Now beast, their four beasts are kingdoms. And now, I'm sorry, the four beasts are kings. And then he says later in the same chapter, the fourth beast is a kingdom. So again, he's conflating them, treating them as if they're the same, while also recognizing that there is a difference.
You can do that with symbolism.
Yeah, and symbolism, I talked about that, right? That's a good point. Nadine said that. You can do that in the realm of symbolism. All right, so in the book of Revelation, what is the first beast? The first beast that he describes has the features of all four of the beasts in Daniel. It's a bear and a lion and or a leopard. It's got portions of all those beasts. So it's a composite, having all the worst qualities of those previous empires. So this first beast in Revelation chapter 13 represents the Roman Empire. That was the beast of their day. It was the empire that was oppressing God's people, the Jews, right? And it was said of Rome, who can fight against it? We find that text in Revelation chapter 13, verse 4. They say, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? It was, so you see, this was relevant to John's audience and to his, to John, to the author and the audience, that Roman Empire of their day was a beast. And in one of the letters, the letter to Pergamum, it's mentioned that Satan's throne is there in Pergamum. Well, what does that mean? The capital of the Roman Empire in Asia was in Pergamum. So the governor's seat or office there in Pergamum was the throne of Satan, because it was, the power of the beast is behind that throne, or the power of the dragon. So it ultimately, it is empowered by Satan, and therefore the seat of the governor in Asia, in the province of Asia, is the seat of Satan. All right, so that's the first beast. What is the second beast in the book of Revelation? That we're going to read about now in chapter 13. So let's read it. It says, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is Well, that's what we're going to talk about. What is the number? That's coming up. All right, so it tells us in this text that the beast is a man. It is a man's number. We know that in Rome there was emperor worship. So it makes perfect sense, again, given the context in the book of Revelation, where Daniel's beast idea is co-opted, that the beast being either a king or a kingdom, an emperor or an empire, that if the second beast is a man, then it is the emperor. So it's one of the Caesars of Rome. And then the number of the name is going to tell us who it is. Essentially, it's a symbol. The number stands in for the name. And as just in everything else in Revelation is done with symbols. So it makes perfect sense in a symbolic book to have a name represented by a symbol rather than to say it outright. All right. Now, okay, let's talk about what is the number of the beast. What is the number? If I were to stand on the street corner with a microphone and ask people, what is the number of the beast? What would the answer most people give? What would be the answer?
666.
Yes, the answer would be 666. Triple six, 3 sixes. Everybody knows that's the number of the beast, right? Well, and probably 99% of the people would say that. What if I made a crazy proposition? What if I said this? 666 is not the number of the beast. That would be crazy, right? Because everybody knows it. But is something true because everybody knows it? You know, again, I like this illustration. If there was a time in the past when everybody knew that the world was flat, did that mean it was flat at that time? No, because even 100% of the people could be wrong. And we know that the earth is a sphere. So if we want to know whether the earth is flat or a sphere, what do? We look at evidence and we make observations. So, you know, we can measure the earth, we can send up satellites, we can send up a rocket ship and take a picture. So we can be certain the earth is a sphere. How do we know what is the number of the beast? From making an observation also and looking at the evidence. And that is in the text of the Bible. That's what determines what the number is. All right, so let's look at the number. Or let's look at the text of the Bible. The ESV says it is the number of a man, and his number is, well, there are the 3 sixes. That would seem to settle it. What? Wait, there's more. The NASB says the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Well, that's not quite the same as 666, because they could have written that out. You know, here's the number written out. All right, the King James says his number is 603 score and 6. Well, that doesn't even have 3 sixes in it. And then the NIV says the number is, again, it's got the 3 sixes. So which of these is right? Well, I said that the text determines the meaning, but we're looking at an English translation. That's not where the original writing is. We have to look at the manuscripts, the original manuscripts. So let's do that. Here is the Codex Sinaiticus, which is online. You can see all the folios. They've scanned them. It's available from the British Museum, or the British Library, which is a museum, oddly. And so we're going to look at this text and see, this is the number of the beast.
What's a Codex Sinaiticus?
Codex Sinaiticus is a 4th century manuscript of the Bible that is as the entire Bible in Greek. All right. So we're zooming in on the part of Revelation 13 that has the number of the beast. There it is on your screen. Do you see it? Let me draw it for you. This is the number of the beast. Okay, now even if you can't read this, you can still do pattern matching with those letters. And let me ask you this. Do you see 3 identical things? Can it be triple anything?
No.
Yeah, you can just tell by looking at it. We don't have 3 identical things. So let's see what this is. It says in the Greek, hexakasiai, hexakenta hex, which if you transliterate into English looks like this. and it means 666. It's spelled out in the Greek. All right. And so this is what it says, and you'll notice that there is a just like in our language, when you say 666, the word six is, I mean, the six is part of that, and so these suffixes here mean hundred and tens, etc. But it doesn't say hex, 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 which would mean 666. All right. So this is what it says. It says 666 spelled out, not 666. Okay, so we're asking, what is the number of the beast? And some of the manuscripts, at least this one has it written out. Do we ever see numerals? Well, yes. They because some of our English translation, as you saw, write it in numerals. Some of the manuscripts also have numerals, but they didn't have a separate set of numerals, so they had to use letters as numerals. So let me show you what that looks like. Here's a chart that shows you the Bible alphabets. Now I'm gonna, because it's a busy chart, I'm gonna zoom in and show you just the Hebrew letters and their numerical value. There they are. Here are the Greek letters and their numerical values. And here's the rest of the chart, just for the sense of completeness. So these are gonna be the numerals that are used, or the letters that will be used as numerals. All right, this manuscript fragment is P47. I got this from the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. On their website, they have many scans of manuscript. And there again is the number of the beast. Do you see it? All right, let's zoom in. There it is. It's the part with the line over top of it. And let me outline it again so you can be sure we're all looking in the same place. Now, it's interesting that it has this line over top. In these manuscripts, as you can see, there are no spaces, there's no punctuation marks. And they were trying to save space, and this was the way that they wrote. Papyrus was very expensive, so they were always looking for space-saving measures. And one of the things they would do is they would abbreviate words that happened a lot, like the word for God. Instead of writing it out, they would put the first letter and the last letter and then draw a line over top. The line over top tells you this is an abbreviation, right? This is not what was in the original. This is an abbreviation of what was in the original. And in this case, we have that line drawn over the numerals. Again, this is telling us these numerals are not the original text. They're an abbreviation of the spelled out one, right? So they want to save space. They're using numerals, which are, as you can see, take up a lot less space. But they've put this line over top. It's kind of like how the King James Version, they put words in italics, because that's to tell you these words weren't in the original text. We've put them in because you need to have them in English for this sentence to make sense. Well, here, this line over top is telling you this is an abbreviation. That's not the original, but it is what they've abbreviated and with numerals. So when we can see, again, looking at this, do we have three identical things? Is it 666, or is it, triple anything? No, it's not. You can tell just by looking at it. All right, so what does this say? It is the three letters he, xi, and stigma. And they represent the numerals. They are the numerals 600, the numeral 60, and the numeral 6. So again, it could have said 666 by putting three stigmas, stigma, 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 but that's not what we have. We have 666, not 666. All right, so I think I've demonstrated now from the original manuscripts that the number of the beast is not 666, but it is 660 and 6. Now, the confusion over this comes from our modern notation, which is called Hindu Arabic notation. I did not know that until I looked it up. I know we use Arabic numerals, but I didn't know they were called Hindu Arabic notation. Now, in our modern notation, we have this. Even our number 666 is like symbolic of a bigger thing. Here's why. The 6 in the hundreds place is stands for or represents 600, but you don't have to write it all out. See, it saves space, just like in the manuscripts. The 6 in the 10 place represents 60, and the 6 in the ones place represents 6. So even, our number, 666, is an abbreviation, so to speak. So now when we look at the text or the modern notation in numerals, people get confused because this is how we write it in our modern system, but that's not what was in the original text of the Bible. So to use our modern context to understand an ancient text is taking the text out of its context, and that causes people to misunderstand it. So if it's true that I stood out and asked people, what is the number of the beast? And they all said 666, they would all be wrong. That is not the number. Now, is this a major difference? Is it going to change the way we live? No, but we should be accurate in our translation. This number of the beast is a quantity, 666 of something unspecified. It is not 3 numerals or 3 digits. And that makes a difference when we're trying to understand it, because we're trying to understand it. Also, the book of Revelation says, do not add or take away. You're losing something when you mistranslate. We are to teach sound doctrine. The Bible tells us that. And you can't get that from the wrong numbers. Now that we have cell phones, I don't get a wrong number very often, because if you want to call someone, you just touch the picture of their face. It's hard to get a wrong number. But I remember the old phone system. We would get a lot of wrong numbers, or you'd call someone and they'd say wrong number. So when we're looking at this number of the beast, a lot of people are getting the wrong number, and so they're teaching the wrong things. Well, let me just give you an example of something that's wrong because people misunderstand the number. One thing you'll hear taught from the pulpits of your church is that there's an unholy trinity in the book of Revelation, that the number 6 is the number of man because it's 1 short of 7. It falls short, and therefore it represents mankind because man is fallen. And so these 3 digits, 6, 6, and 6, represent an unholy trinity, 3 like things. But of course, I just showed you, we don't actually have 3 6s, 3 like things. So this doesn't work. Also, the number 6 is never used in this way. They just came up with that. There's no examples you can find in the Bible. And they usually will say the unholy trinity is the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Well, those aren't 3 like things. And they're not 3 men. The dragon representing Satan. Satan is not a man. He's a fallen angel. So it doesn't even work. I mean, it doesn't work at any level. So, and also in the book of Revelation, we have the whore of Babylon, or the prostitute. Well, there's 4, great enemies of God in the book. Why do you leave this one out and just say 3? In fact, some people in their unholy trinity, they put the prostitute. So they can't even decide which of the 4 are the unholy trinity. The whole thing doesn't work, but it comes out of a misunderstanding of what the number is. It's, again, taking it out of context. Now, I've seen this done by top theologians. I mean, manuscript experts, guys who would look at those manuscripts and tell us all, things that we don't even realize. It just is amazing to think that they didn't even check that the popular understanding of what the number is more powerful to them than the actual text in the manuscripts. All right. Next question. What does the number 666 mean? Why is it there? Well, we have to think like first century Jewish Christians. The Bible is written in their context and has to be understood in their context. We are given a riddle. John says, let the one who is wise understand and calculate the number of the beast, which is a name. How do you get the name from a number? You do that with gematria. Gematria is using those letter values that we saw in that chart before to add up the value of any word or a name. There's actually some gematria in the Bible. There's very little, but it's there. So let me show you some gematria. All right, this is a gematria calculator rather. So you can type in a name and it will calculate it. So let me type in my name, Scott. And there's, in the English system, the value of Scott is 563, and there are the individual letter values.
Hard to see.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry. You have to watch it on the big screen. There's Nadine in Gematria 119. I'm getting flickering. I don't know why that is. Let's do Jody. All right, so we can do this all day. And they also have a Greek system and a Hebrew system. But it basically is, it's just that simple. All right, so now we're going to, let me show you a quote from Dr. Keener about this. He says, but one need develop no special methods to arrive at the figure of 666. Greek and Hebrew both used letters as numerals, and that numeric system was well established. Names often appear as numbers in graffiti recovered from the Roman Empire. Now that's amazing. They were actually, you know, instead of writing someone's name to insult them, they would put the number, and everybody understood that that number represented this particular person. And we've discovered, you know, these artifacts. We have graffiti in which gematria is used to write someone's name. All right. So next question. What does this number 666 mean? Can we know whose name it is? Now, I've heard some people, because there's all this confusion, because there's been so many different choices of a person, could it be this person, could it be this person? I've heard some people say that this number is a lock that any key can open. What do they mean by that? If you take someone's name and you massage it, you know, you add and subtract or shorten it, abbreviate, add titles or remove titles, you can make almost any number fit into the 666, which is why, you know, popes and famous people have been called, you know, legitimately, I mean, according to the people, they think it's legitimate because look, I did all these mathematical calculations to make it fit, but they're actually force fitting. And so it's caused people to just throw up their hands and say, we can never know. This number could apply to anything. We're just not going to know probably until it's over. Well, the problem is that they're not understanding the Bible has a context, and the context fixes the meaning. So it's only true that you can apply this to almost anything by taking it out of context. See, the Bible has a primary objective meaning, and people have lost track of that. Because of it has a fixed meaning, we can know what this number represents. All right. So what is that context? Well, the time and place and the culture in which the book was written. As it was meant by its original author to be understood by its audience. It was in the 1st century. John and his audience were in the Roman Empire. In their culture, they did gematria, so that was common. The languages are limited. It's going to either be Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic or Latin. Those were the ones spoken in the Roman Empire. We know from the Old Testament motifs, as I spoke about before, that these beasts have to match what Daniel said is the beast. It's either a kingdom or a king. And then the text tells us it's the number of a man. So that makes it more likely that it should be the king or a king, or a Caesar. In fact, a Caesar would be perfect if we could find one. All right, so what are some of the proposed names for the beast? One of the names that the church fathers came up with, these are, the early church writers like Augustine and his Irenaeus in Oregon, was this word Latinos. This is a Greek word, and it means a Roman. Let me show you in the calculator. All right. We got to go to Greek, and I've got to use my Greek keyboard, and I can put Latinos, and you'll see that the sum of Latinos is 666. And you also see here that it's transliteration. This is how it looks in English. All right, so what's wrong with that? Well, it refers to a Latin. It does not refer to all Latins, like the empire, the Latins. And, it's a cultural thing. Latin was the language that they spoke, but not all of the Romans were part of that city-state or that original culture called the Latins. The Roman Empire was made up of several of these Italian city-states and tribes who had made, come together. So not all Romans could even be considered Latins. It just doesn't even fit as an empire. The Romans called themselves Romans. They didn't call themselves Latins. So this doesn't work. It applies to too many people, and we couldn't say that all those people are beasts. Not all of them were, So there were Romans who became Christian. It just doesn't work. Here's another idea that's been proposed. Caligula, who was the emperor, he died in 41 AD. So this is long before the book of Revelation is written. But why think it might be Caligula? He went by the name Gaius Caesar. So let's go to the calculator and see what happens. All right. You would normally spell Gaius Caesar this way. Kaiser. All right. And that comes out to 946. Well, that's not right. There is an alternative spelling for Gaius where you have an O instead of a U, Gaius Caesar. And that comes to 616. So here's the transliteration, remember, and there's the value, 616. Now you'll say, hey, wait a second, 616 is not 666. Why does anyone even propose Caligula as a candidate? Well, the reason is there are some manuscripts that say 616 instead of 666. There is a manuscript variant, and it's a minority report. There are fewer of them, but it's an interesting variant because it's not likely to be an accident. The word, the entire word has changed. This is not like a single letter. Usually most scribal mistakes in a number are because a single letter was dropped or a numeral. If a numeral was placed, they put the wrong numeral because two letters look alike. In this case, because it's written out, that's not likely to be the case. It seems to be an intentional change. So some people think that 616 is the right number and that it applies to Caligula. But then the question is, well, why do so many of them say 666? That doesn't work with Caligula's name. Also, as I said, Caligula died in 41. How is that relevant to John's audience in the latter half of the first century? Gaius Caesar, aka Caligula, was not a great prosecutor of the church. So again, why are people proposing this? Well, they go to 2 Thessalonians 2, the passage that says there's a man of lawlessness who will take his seat in the temple of God and demand worship. Now, Gaius Caesar did call himself a god, and he asked to be worshipped. And he tried to get a statue of himself put in the temple in Jerusalem. However, it never happened. So he did not actually take his seat in the temple of God. So there are too many marks against Caligula. It just doesn't work. All right, the last one that we got to consider then is Nero Caesar. And let me just show you on the calculator how Nero Caesar works out. All right, still in Greek. If we put Nero Caesar, the number is 557, so we don't quite get there yet. But there was another spelling with an N at the end, Neron Caesar. We still don't get 666. However, if we translate this or transliterate into Hebrew, and we use the Hebrew alphabet, then we can put the equivalent of Nero Caesar in Hebrew, we get 666. All right. So that may seem a bit tortured, but let's keep going. Let's talk about Nero. He was the emperor at the time that many scholars believe the book of Revelation was written. There are two dates that are favored, the early date and the late date. The early date is around 68, the late date 95 AD. Nero was emperor in 68. In fact, that's the year he died. And he had been persecuting the church for 14 years. His was one of the worst persecutions ever. And even if the book of Revelation was written on the late date, he was still feared and remembered. And there was a myth that Nero was not really dead, see, because he committed suicide. You see that, and people were so afraid of this guy there was a persistent myth that he was going to come back with an army of Parthians and destroy Rome. And some people even thought that was going to usher in the end times, so that he would be the Antichrist who brought about the end of history by destroying the Roman Empire with this supernatural army from across the river. So people, were still afraid of him at the late date. All right. However, we need to justify, if we're going to accept this candidate, why spell it in this way, with the N at the end? Why transliterated into Hebrew? And I'm going to use the Bible to demonstrate both of these. We're also going to use the science of numismatics. Numismatics is the study of money in ancient cultures. It's a subdiscipline of archaeology. And this Greek word, the root word that gives us the word numismatics, is nomisma. It means coin or money. And it's actually found in the Bible, although only one. All right, so in this passage where they come to Jesus and ask him, should we pay taxes? He says in verse 19 here, show me the coin for the tax. Nomisma to kensu. So there's nomisma, which gives us numismatics. And so the coin that Jesus had would have had the image of Caesar, but it would be Tiberius Caesar. But coins last a long time. So let me look at some other coins. This coin here, this is a coin called a nomisma. It was from the 600s AD. And so, again, we see that word nomisma. This is a coin of Nero Caesar that would be from the 1st century. That's the kind of coin that they would have had. And this is a silver tetradrachm. It is 4 drachma coin. It's called a tetradrachm. All right, you can see his face and all the writing on there. Now, in this passage in Matthew 17, when Peter comes to Jesus and says, they're asking if we pay the temple tax in Capernaum. And it specifically calls it a 2 drachma tax. If you look here at the yellow letters, D drachma, D meaning 2, drachma is the amount. So, and Jesus tells Peter, go through a hook in the sea, pull up a fish, and you're going to find a coin in the fish, give it to them to pay the tax. If we have, Jesus says, give it to them for you and for me to pay the 2 drachma tax. Well, how much money do you need to pay the 2 drachma tax for 2 people? 4 drachmas. And it's a coin. He didn't say you'll find a bunch of coins or multiple coins. Take this one coin. So this silver tetradrachm that I just showed you could have been the kind of coin that they used to pay the tax. And that would mean that there's a mention of a tetradrachm in the Bible. Okay, it doesn't say that. And some people think it might be a shekel, which would also pay the tax for the 2 men, but it doesn't tell us one way or the other. And the other thing is, in Capernaum, if they were collecting there, they would have preferred the Roman money to the shekel, because shekels were not common currency in Rome. Anyway, that's beside the point. Let's look at this coin that I showed you, the tetradrachm, and zoom in on the writing. All right, here's the coin. And now we zoom in on the name here, and we have in Greek letters Neron Kaisar. Neron Kaisar. This is the spelling that produces 666. It's right here on a hard artifact that we found, so that we can be sure that this is a legitimate spelling, right? It's now justified. In fact, John could have had just such a coin on his person while he was writing the book of Revelation, and to add up the letters and say, this is the number that I'm going to write in the book. And when his audience is reading this, his first audience, they also could have reached into their pocket, pulled out a coin, and said, oh, I can do the gematria right off of these letters here. And what they would have come up with is 666. Right? So it's relevant to those people at that time. It has to be to fit the context of the book of Revelation. Let me show you another coin. This is a gold aureus from Nero Caesar. It's a work of beauty and very well preserved. As you can see, his name is written here, Nero Caesar. I don't even have to tell you which letters are which, because these are the same letters that we use. They're Latin letters, and you can probably read that. It says Nero Caesar, although they probably would have pronounced it in Latin Caesar, just like it was written in Greek. All right. So now the second question that I said we have to justify is why transliterate the Greek text of the book of Revelation into Hebrew before doing the gematria? And some people accuse us of saying, oh, that's just arbitrary. You picked the alphabet that gave you the result you wanted. You're forcing it to fit. But that's not what we're doing. And here's why. We are restricted by the context. If we want to know what this is, we have to match the biblical context. So what is the justification for transliterating the letters into Hebrew? It's because all the gematria in the Bible is done in Hebrew. So when these people were doing gematria, one of the things they were looking for is to find things that match. If you find two numbers that match, then the words they thought had some mystical connection, some significance. This is a kind of a numerology. It's somewhat mystical. Now that's not what the Bible is, not engaged in mysticism. The Bible is just using it as a symbol. And the Bible is a reflection of the culture it was written in. So it has all the facets of the culture are there, including this idea of a number representing a name. There's nothing untoward about that. We also find in the Bible there are myths like dragons and sea creatures or sea monsters. Of course, they knew that there were no such creatures, but those are just monsters or things from their myths, right? So there's nothing weird about it, is what I'm saying. So why do we transliterate into Hebrew? Because of tradition and because of the biblical context. The people in those days would have known the numbers of famous people. So in order to find a match and say this matches that, you have to use the same language. So let me give you an example from the Bible itself, an example of gematria that demonstrates how the tradition was in Hebrew, because they were doing this for hundreds of years, the Jewish people, and the Jewish people used the Jewish alphabet. The Greeks would use a Greek alphabet and the Latins could use their Latin alphabet. Everybody did gematria in their own language. So here in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 1, he gives the genealogy of Jesus, and then he says this in verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. All right, notice the 14, 14, 14. And some commentators have pointed out that Matthew has kind of massaged the genealogy to fit this number scheme. He's left out some people. And he's, duplicated. You can see the name of David appears twice. Why is Matthew working so hard to fit this number 14, the 14? What is so significant about 14 for Matthew? Well, first of all, it was a common technique in genealogies to make them fit a number pattern. One of the popular numbers was 10. So you would either have 10 or some multiple of 10 of your ancestors. 10, 20, 30, however many you knew, and they would just, use the most famous ones and leave out the less famous ones. So Matthew isn't doing anything strange. That was, again, this is something they did in their culture. The second thing is the reason he chooses 14 is because the Jews would have known that the number for King David is the number 14, right? This is from centuries of tradition. Everybody knows that 14 represents David. So what Matthew is saying is, he starts out his chapter 1 saying Jesus is the son of David, right? And then Matthew is saying, even when we look at his genealogy in the 14, 14, 14, just his ancestry screams David, son of David, son of David, son of David, right? The number 14 is representing David. So fitting the genealogy into 3 14s is making Matthew's point. This is the Messiah. This is the king who has been coming, the king of the Jews. And he is the son of David. Now, since that's context for reading the book of Revelation, we're justified in transliterating into Hebrew. That's what they would have used. All right, matches can only be made in the same system. Let me show you David's number in the calculator. All right, if we go back to Greek, because some people say you should have used the Greek. Let me get my Greek keyboard. And if I put in David the way that Matthew spelled it, we get 21. That's not 14. Now there's an alternative spelling, oops, for David, Dawid. That's not 14. So it only works if we go back to the Hebrew and to our Hebrew calculator, and we type in, where's my cursor? We type in Dawid in Hebrew, we get 14. There it is. So this is what Matthew is doing, and this is a gematria that's in the Bible, and it's, you know,
Greek, translated.
Yeah, Greek transliterated into Hebrew, or actually, it's actually the other way. To make the code, you go from Hebrew to Greek, and then, you know, to undo the code or to resolve the riddle, you go the other way. All right. So, you know, another thing I wanted to point out is in those days, there were no rules for spelling. It's not like you could go look things up in a dictionary, and there were no rules. I mean, there have never been rules for transliteration, and there are probably different gematria tables. So what people would do is they would try different techniques, try different spellings, and until they found one that fit. And the other thing is certain numbers were known, right? So if their people are making graffiti and they're using a number instead of the name, that requires that they think the audience who's going to look at this graffiti knows that what that number means. So most people would know just because it was like in the popular culture. All right. What about this line in the text we read about buying and selling? No one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. This is why some people have suggested that the number of the beast refers to the universal product code, the UPC symbol, or the credit card, the chip that's in your credit card, or some kind of implant in under your skin that allows you to buy and sell. But this is not right. And in fact, all these things are giving us options on buying and selling. They're not restricting our ability. They're actually giving us different options. We have so many different ways to pay these days. But I want to talk about something that was going on in the Roman Empire that we can see evidence of on the gold Aureus, the coin that I showed you. The Caesars of that day were sucking up all the titles. They became a dictator, concentrating all power in one man. And they would suck up all the titles that had belonged to independent offices. Imagine a US president who's becoming a dictator, and he declares himself Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and I'm the Speaker of the House, and I'm the President of the Senate, and I'm the Attorney General. He just takes all these titles that had belonged to independent offices and brings them on himself because he's concentrating all the power and becoming an ultimate dictator. This is what the Caesars did. So let me show you this on the gold Aureus. You can see here on the reverse of the coin, we have this PONTIF period, MAX period. This is an abbreviation for this phrase in Latin, Pontifex Maximus. It means the highest priest. And this, you know, okay, so let me talk about what that's all about. In this polytheistic culture of Rome, there are all these different religions. You got, you know, your different gods of the pantheon. You've got Jews. You've got probably other pagan religions, and they have different religious practices. They're all incompatible. So, in order to keep order in the Rome and to be in the Roman Empire and to be the ultimate dictator, the Caesars took this role on themselves of highest high priest. So if some religious organization came to this to say, well, you know, we can't work or we can't do this or we can't, you know, be involved in this because our high priest tells us not to, then Caesar could say, well, I outrank your high priest. I'm the highest high priest. So I'm going to tell you, you got to do it anyway. That was necessary to keep order. Of course, if you do that too much, you start a riot, but you know, that was the careful balance that they kept there in Rome. Now, think about what this would mean to the Christians. We have one high priest forever, Jesus, who is our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. No one can outrank Jesus because he is God in the flesh. He is King of Kings. He outranks Caesar. So then Caesar says, I'm the highest priest. That's blasphemy. And it's right there on the coin. So this coin is blasphemy to Christians. Let me give you an illustration to show you what it would be like. Imagine if we had a US president who put his name in place of God. Instead of "In God We Trust," it said, well, what if it said on the back, "In Trump We Trust," or "In Obama We Trust," right? That would be blasphemy written on our money. And we would say, as Christians, we don't want to use that money. If we accept this money and we use it, that endorses the idea that this man is taking the place of God. We would say, this president is a beast. What he's doing is bestial. And our money now has the image of the beast on it. We would want to boycott that money. But if we did, if that was the only option that we had, it would be no one can buy or sell unless he has this money with the image of the beast. Okay, but in those days, they didn't have all the kind of alternatives that we do. They just had the coins and a few other things, but coins were the primary means. So in their context, in that day, those coins are blasphemy. They have the mark of the beast, the inscription, the engraving. All these words kind of have a very similar meaning. So you can see why this would be relevant to them and why it's in the text. Let me show you this quote from Dr. Keener. He says, Deisman cites the imperial seal or mark, charigma, same word is used in Revelation 13, stamped on commercial documents. One could do little in commerce without handling such a mark because allusions to the emperor's divinity appeared on many coins and even shipping bills and other documents. So I showed you on the coin, but other documents and bills and stamps and labels, these marks all had the emperor's name and information on it. Further, he says, even in John's day, however, one could not handle money without involvement in the imperial system. To withdraw from an economic system permeated with imperial worship, even to withdraw from trade guilds whose meetings include meat offered to idols, was in many cities economic suicide. So there you can see why that's right, or why that's relevant. All right, let's talk about the mark of the beast. Is this actually going to go on people's skin, on their forehead, on their hand? Well, we've actually talked about this motif. It's an Old Testament motif. I talked about it before in speaking of Revelation 20, where it says the saints do not receive the mark of the beast on their forehead or their hands. These are metaphorical body parts that are used. Now, we still use the heart as a metaphorical body part. We talk about it as if it's the seat of emotion, right? My heart was broken, or I felt this pain in my heart, meaning, I had this emotional pain. But we know that this, this pump, this muscle inside of our body is not the seat of our emotions. It's a metaphor. And in the Bible, there are a lot more metaphors. The forehead and the hand are two different metaphors. The forehead being our character, the hand being our actions, the ethics of the person. So in the previous lesson, we looked at this Old Testament motif. The high priest had a plate on the forehead, on his turban, so it would have been over his forehead. It was engraved with the name of Yahweh. So he had the name of God on his forehead. Now, it wasn't on his skin. It wasn't branded or tattooed on there, but it was, to say the high priest is to reflect God's character, right? He has God's character stamped on him metaphorically, and the intention is that he would behave in that way toward the people so that they would see God in him. Now, in our current climate as Christians, we are all a kingdom of priests. We have God's name and the Lamb's name metaphorically stamped on our forehead, the metaphorical body part, because we are to reflect the image of God. We are to reflect the character of Jesus. And because we have the Holy Spirit, we're being made more and more into his likeness. So we all have this name on our foreheads, again, metaphorically. And this is the image that we're getting in the book of Revelation. I talked about before in the Ezekiel 9 passage where God's accountant angel with the writing case, he's sent through the city to put a mark on the forehead. Now, all this happens in John's vision, and there are no reports of people suddenly having a mark on their actual forehead. It was done, if it was done for real, it was in the unseen realm where the angels can see it, but we can't. So this is, and again, it's to mark God's people out as set apart, as different. So to receive the mark, for receiving the mark of the beast, again, it's not a physical mark on the skin, but it is to receive the character of these emperors, these empires, and the power of the dragon, Satan, that empowers them, that's behind them. When you compromise with the world's values, when you say, yes, we will use that blasphemous currency, yes, we will acknowledge Caesar as Pontifex Maximus, or as a god, whatever he asks to be to be treated as, then you're compromising, allowing the world to change you rather than serving God. Jesus said, no one can serve two masters, right? You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon was the god of wealth or money. So you just can't, serve both of these. And as Dr. Keener mentioned there, if you were a member of a trade guild and they handed out all the work, they would have a meeting where they sacrificed meat to their patron god. And if you didn't join, you wouldn't get any work. So it's, like he says, economic suicide. No one can buy or sell unless they receive the character or acknowledge the empire, the emperor, and it's blasphemies. It has blasphemous names on his forehead. So you see, all these ideas that are in the text would be relevant, highly relevant to them, and completely associated with the number of the beast and the name of the emperor Nero Caesar, who was a persecutor of Christians. So there was tremendous economic pressure on the Christians to comply with the culture's values. Guess what? That hasn't changed, folks, right? We know that. That's still relevant to us today. So this teaching in the book of Revelation is still relevant to us today. There's still tremendous economic pressure on us and other pressures, social pressures, and so forth, to comply with the culture's values rather than with God's values. And a lot of Christians do compromise their values. So, but the book of Revelation is an exhortation. It says, don't do that. Stick with God. We are to be God's children. Don't give in to that pressure. Keep your life free from love of money. And, that's never easy in this world. And right after chapter 13, where John sees the beasts, then he sees in chapter 14, the Lamb on Mount Zion, and the saints are with him, those who are redeemed. And they have the name of the Lamb and God on their forehead. They sing a new song, and they are considered virgins, because they haven't committed idolatry. This is another metaphor in the book of Revelation. All spiritual adultery is a way to represent idolatry. And these redeemed saints who are with the Lamb, they follow him wherever he goes. They stand before God, which is to say they are priests. That's an Old Testament metaphor or motif for the priesthood. To stand before God is to serve as priests. So this is the kingdom of priests. It is us. So long as we're faithful, we have that on our forehead, and we're to reflect that in our actions by the mark of the Lamb and God on our right hand. That's to encourage us to act in appropriate ways according to God's nature. So this is what the book is teaching, exhorting people to correct behavior. And we find other of these matches within the text. So all this is grounded and fixed by the text. In chapter 13, verse 14, the beast demands worship of us, of an idol that he sets up, and threatens to kill anyone who doesn't worship that idol. That's an Old Testament motif. That's from Daniel chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar set up a golden image, commanded everyone to worship it, and threatened to kill everybody. So the same thing that was done in Daniel's day is being done in John's day, and it's still being done in certain places in this world today. The Christians are being told, you need to comply with this worship or this type of idolatry, or will, persecute you, kill you, whatever. So that's still going on, still relevant to us. It was very relevant to them. In verse 11 of chapter 13, we see that the beast has two horns like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. So the lamb is Jesus in the book of Revelation. We're told the beast has two horns like a lamb. In other words, it's a false lamb, a false Messiah. It is a pretender. It is a pseudo Christos, a false Christ. This word appears in the Bible. There will be false Christs. We're warned about them. And John is basically picking up this motif, which is also mentioned in the New Testament. Jesus says there will be false Christs. Well, the emperor sets himself up as a false Messiah. I will be your savior. I, the emperor, you don't need these gods. I'm your God. Some of the emperors called themselves gods. Some of them called them son of the gods. Again, usurping that's even the titles of Jesus. They commanded people to say Kaiser Kurios. Caesar is Lord, but the Christians have to say Jesu Kurios. Jesus is Lord. And so when we see that in the Bible, the one who says Caesar or Jesus is Lord it will be saved. To do that in those days, you had to buck the culture and the pressure that was coming from the Caesars to worship them as if they were gods, or to name them Lord versus Jesus as your Lord. So, and there's more. I could go through this text verse by verse and show you all the connections to the time and the place and the culture, but you get the idea. And again, so all this is grounded and fixed in the context of those days so that we can understand who the beast is, what that number means, and who it represents. And in fact, this is similar to how we demonstrate that Jesus is the only person who could be the Messiah of Israel. We have all these prophecies in the Old Testament, and they narrow in on the person of Jesus like rings of a bullseye, right? He has to be the seed of a woman. Well, that's a lot of people. Well, he has to be the seed of Abraham. Okay, now it's getting narrower. Okay, he has to be a lion of the tribe of Judah. Okay, narrower. He's got to be the son of David. Narrower still. And it keeps narrowing to fulfill all those Old Testament prophecies. He has to come at a certain time. He has to do certain things. Only Jesus could be the Messiah because of what's written in the text. It's the same with this beast. The things that are written in the text, focus it down and narrow in until it can only be Nero Caesar, because no one else can tick as many boxes as he can. So there you go. It's basically demonstrated from the text with archaeological data. We have, hard artifacts. All right. A little bit more about Nero, just so you understand that he was a really nasty character. He would have been at the time the most famous person in the world, kind of like the president of the United States is usually the most famous people. Everybody would have had a coin with his name on it. And he was a persecutor of the church. We have historians like Tacitus and Josephus and Suetonius telling us about the horrible things that he did. I'm going to play you a clip here in just a second. He persecuted Christians. He threw them to animals in the Colosseums, in the gladiatorial arenas. They were put on crosses and burned to light up the city. Peter and Paul were killed under Nero's persecutions. Imagine what it would be like as Christians. You're this new cult. You're hiding underground. You're being persecuted. And the two great pillars of the church, Peter and Paul, are killed. We might have, thought this is the end, we're all going to be killed. And then Jesus will come and avenge us, because it just looks like the end of everything. Things were really bad. You have to just put yourself in their situation. So now I want to play you a short clip from R.C. Sproul. It's 3 minutes, and he's talking about the Emperor Nero.
We also know that the first century church endured enormous persecution. First at the hands of the Jewish community, but then secondly at the hands of the Romans. And one of the most significant persecutions arose in the decade of the 60s under the authority of Nero. And it was under Nero's authority that the persecution of Christians began, and as tradition tells us, Nero himself perhaps started the great fire that destroyed so many sections of Rome, and turned around and blamed it on the Christians, which caused the Christians to come in great popular disfavor at that time. It was under Nero that the two great saints of the first century church were executed, Peter and Paul. Both of them were martyred under the reign of Nero and at his command. in the ancient world, even among pagans, nobody distinguished themselves for their wickedness to the degree that the Emperor Nero did. Nero's life was a life of radical violence and debauchery. He murdered several of his own family members. He castrated a boy and then, quote, married the boy. He brutally murdered his own wife while she was pregnant by kicking her to death. And the historian Suetonius wrote that Nero devised a kind of game in which, covered with the skin of some wild animal, he was let loose from a cage and attacked the private parts of men and women who were bound to stakes. That is, as part of the entertainment that he sponsored, either in the Circus Maximus or in the Colosseum, probably in the Circus Maximus. Again, more summations of the character of Nero from antiquity. The historian Tacitus spoke of Nero's cruel nature, and Pliny, the Roman naturalist, Pliny the Elder, described Nero, quote, as the destroyer of the human race and, quote, the poison of the world. The Roman satirist Juvenal spoke of, quote, Nero's cruel and bloody tyranny. And Apollonius of Tyana specifically says in his writings that the favorite nickname that people had for Nero was simply the Beast.
All right. The favorite nickname was the Beast. People knew him as the Beast already, and he behaved in a bestial manner. So just think about that. Even people who couldn't do the gematria, didn't know the letters, and couldn't do the math, they might still know this guy as the Beast. And so when they read in the book of Revelation about the Beast, they would probably already be going, yeah, I know who that is, right? They wouldn't even need to do the math in those days because it was so relevant to their culture. Another thing, I was just, as we were listening to R.C. Sproul, he mentioned a same-sex marriage. There it is in ancient Rome. We thought it was a new problem. It's not a new problem. It's been going on for millennia. All right. So there we go. This is what the Beast is. Now, what is God teaching us in all this about in the book of Revelation? Well, the world system that is propped up by these emperors and empires and by oppressors is bestial. That is, does not have the character of man or God. It is inhumane. It is cruel and hurtful. These empires don't serve God, but they serve the world, the flesh, and the devil, and they're empowered by Satan. They are an incarnation of the domain of darkness. This is how it shows up in the world. And Nero, the cruelest emperor of Rome, is a prototype, or an archetype, even better, of all of these beasts. Like Nebuchadnezzar was a beast, right? And he's described that way in the early parts of Daniel's book. Nero is that just kind of penultimate or quintessential beast or oppressor emperor. So this also becomes a symbol in the book of Revelation for all these different empires. And this has been going on since the Tower of Babel. In fact, this Old Testament motif is also picked up in the book of Revelation because we have this fallen Babylon and the whore of Babylon. Babylon, again, representing the Roman Empire, but not to say it's the only bestial empire, but because of the mention of Babylon, it's saying, you know, as far back as that, the Tower of Babel, this has been going on. There have been a series of emperors and attempts and empires and kings and kingdoms attempting to take over the world, to set up a one world government or a one world religion to control all the rest of mankind. And they're all bestial. So Nero, it was the one that was relevant in John's day to his audience, but he was also a pattern again, archetype of all the ones that came before and all the ones that come after. And the book of Revelation is saying this is going to keep happening. And each one will fall and be replaced by another. But there's good news in our eschatology. I'm always looking for the gospel in our eschatology, right? There is good news here. The book of Revelation is also telling us the ultimate defeat of these beasts has already been won at the cross by our Lord Jesus Christ. Same thing as what we talked about with the dragon. He's already a defeated enemy. However, God in his sovereignty allows these things to continue until the end. And this is the way things are going to be until the end, we're told. But those empires and those evils are doomed. They're ultimately doomed. However, as they thrash around in their death throes, it's still dangerous and harmful to us. These beasts will make war on us and conquer us and kill us, but they cannot harm our souls. We're protected by God. And the church will always continue while, there's been a succession of empires who have risen and fallen. They always will. In fact, in the same way that the dragon is bound, is restricted in what he can do, these beasts are also restricted. One of their restrictions is time. They're all doomed to fail, each in turn. In fact, the book of Revelation represents this with the number 3.5. 3.5 years is the time that they're allowed to make war on the saints and all this stuff. Well, this is another symbolic number. It is half of 7. 7 is the number of completion and perfection. 3.5 represents incompleteness, imperfection. And so these beasts and their empires, they're allowed to go for a time, but they're never going to be complete. They're never going to be perfect, right? This is the times of the Gentiles, but it has limited dominion. And we are the conquerors in suffering under these horrible beasts and emperors. And let me ask the expert panel what they have to say. Dr. Mulholland in his Revelation commentary says this: for John and his readers, the second beast, like the first, was incarnate in Caesar Nero. While this was the primary focus for John, it does not preclude other figures throughout history who have used positions of power to persecute God's people. Again and again in human history, a particular historical incarnation of the beast has seemed invincible and nearly destroyed the people of God in its midst. But each of those incarnations has fallen, and the people of God's New Jerusalem continue. This does not mean that life will be easy for God's people. In every age, faithful citizens of New Jerusalem experience tribulation at the hands of their particular fallen Babylon world. And that's where we are. So their ultimate fate is decided. The beasts and the false prophets and everyone, they'll be thrown into the lake of fire. But our ultimate fate is to live forever in the presence of God. That's the victory that Jesus has won for us at the cross, and we participated in it through our union with him. And that's the end of the lesson. Thank you.
Yay.